anything that was substantially developed. Izuka's reaction to hearing the name Selph was instant, which led me to personally believe that the character was at the forefront of his memory, therefore making it something more prominent and inclusive of what Nights into Dreams would have contained, rather than a mere disposable concept character. I believed Selph had more production put into him than Izuka had been leading on. That's when Travis came back with results from his attempted data mine. Firstly, the bad news. As could be expected at the time, there was only so much that could be done with the limited knowledge we had about data mining Saturn game data. Travis wasn't able to get very far, and whatever he was able to find only seemed to confirm that Selph might have been there once, but no longer was. From what Travis could tell, the file pertaining to Selph was mostly empty. The good news was he had made a notable observation, the first observation of its kind when in regards to Selph. The SFD file that would have connected to Selph was spelt differently than how it had been spelt in the boss list containing the concept names. Selph in the boss list was spelt with a PH at the end, however the file in this beta demo's data was spelt as it is grammatically meant to be spelt, S-E-L-F. It's a small detail for sure, but an important one if we are taking all of Selph's details into account. And it's a detail that would further re-emerge on more than one occasion.
My new holiday designs have arrived and I am so excited to share them with you, only at Target.
As the 2007 interview with Takashi Iizuka showed, if you are part of a company, chances are you are pretty limited to what you could talk about. So, what about Yuji Naka then? Yuji Naka had been one of the founding members of Sonic Team, but left Sega during March 2006. He then went on to form his own company and was working on a number of independent titles at the time. Technically, he was no longer contractually bound to Sega, and I wondered what an interview with him would be like on a more casual level, less of the red tape and treading on eggshells variety, and more of a direct one-on-one line of communication. Social networks had gained popularity towards the tail end of 2009, with everybody from the regular casual citizen to the glitzy glamorous Hollywood star creating accounts on those platforms. People who had once been entirely out of reach were now just one click away from potential interaction. Convenient. During June 2010, I located Yuji Naka online and politely approached him to see if he would be interested in doing an interview. Personally, I wasn't expecting to get any sort of response, but he replied and agreed, with the interview taking place over direct messages. Within the interview, we asked him about Selph, to which he responded with the following information. Selph is one of the original archetypes of Carl Jung's theory. This idea was omitted since the production period was short on time. It was thought that it would be introduced as a concealed boss. Visualization of this character was made to some degree. Yuji Naka's answer regarding Selph elaborates a bit further than what Takashi Iizuka was able to tell us a few years prior. Naka states that some progress had been made towards Selph's development, which added to my own speculation that the character was more than just an idea that never left the concept stage. A new piece of information that had been learnt from this interview was how Selph was intended to fit into the game. Naka uses the phrase concealed boss. Now, while it could be considered as a vague term, from a game design aspect, using the phrase concealed implies hidden. This information could mean that Selph would have been a hidden boss. This concept is something that Sonic Team had demonstrated in their previous game Sonic & Knuckles. Upon collecting all the Chaos Emeralds, an extra stage would unlock, allowing you to battle a boss that doesn't appear through regular gameplay. By defeating this boss, you earn the complete intended ending for Sonic & Knuckles. With Naka's answer claiming Selph would have been a hidden boss, it's very likely that a portion of Nights' intended gameplay design would have seen you complete side objectives that would eventually unlock the boss fight with Selph. In these terms, Selph could be considered an extension of the main game design, so when time constraints caused the project to make some cuts, this extension was removed. But it's also worth considering that if Selph was to have been a hidden boss, then would it have occurred in the same manner as Sonic & Knuckles, where you unlock a hidden boss that provides you with the full ending for the game? If that were to have been the case with Selph, then this information coincides with what Takashi Iizuka said to his translator during the 2007 interview, that the story of Nights was complete, therefore Selph was no longer needed, implying that Selph might have had an impact on the story. We must also take into account what Naka is referring to when he says Selph is one of the original archetypes of Carl Jung's theory. Carl Jung, a pioneer in dream theory and psychology, was a huge part of Sonic Team's research, being highly influential to their design choices for Nights into Dreams. The archetypes that Naka is referring to are Carl Jung's breakdown of the human psyche. These archetypes were used as a basis to craft some of the characters for the game. Anima and Animus represent Clarice and Elliot, the feminine and masculine traits in a person's psychological identity. The Shadow represents Nights, which is the wildness and the chaos. And one of the other major archetypes is simply called Self, an archetype that is the unification of the conscious and subconscious to create the totality of the psyche. That sounds pretty important if you ask me, and with Self being based on that archetype, I think his involvement might have been pretty crucial. Of course, this is just me putting breadcrumbs together to see if they come from the same loaf of bread. I could be making a reach here, but between the information from both Iizuka and Naka, it strongly leads me to believe that Self was intended to be something quite significant indeed. Between Travis's acquisition of the E3 beta demo in 2007 and the Nights into Dreams' HD remaster releasing globally in 2012, there were various smaller data mining attempts. These quick digs were not part of any group project, but rather individuals were randomly poking into the files to see if they could figure out the data and find anything worthy of note. During the span of those 5 years, there were two notable discoveries, one of which I personally think does not link to Self at all, but one that absolutely definitely does. We will start with the one that I feel has less connection to Self. In 2011, a user by the name of Bosco was able to rip audio from the game. It would appear that entire chunks of audio data gets grouped together in sections that are then individually accessed by the various parts of the game that requires them. So when you rip audio data from, let's say, Riala's file, the audio is grouped together like this. All the audio plays one after the other, and it can sound very cluttered, especially if you're dealing with back-to-back strings of random sound effects. Let's have a listen to Twin Seeds' audio data. Oof, it sounds like a 1990s logo bumper for a cartoon company. But all jokes aside, if you were listening carefully, you might have noticed a few sound effects are not used in Twin Seeds, or Nights into Dreams at all for that matter. Further inspection located an audio file named Unused, containing a small string of unused audio. Within that audio file, you can hear a person yelling the word Sora. At the time of its discovery, some people gravitated towards the Sora line and wondered if it might have belonged to Self. Self was an unused character, and this line of dialogue was unused. It was a possible link if you wanted to make that reach, but it wasn't a theory I entirely invested in, for a number of reasons. Firstly, the line itself seems out of place for Nights. The language in the game is of a fictional language that Sonic Team made up. It was designed to be the language of the dream world, and although there are actual real-world translations for what the dream creatures are saying, the dialogue you hear in the game is meant to be unrecognizable. This fact alone doesn't lend itself too well to the dialogue, because Sora is a literal Japanese word meaning sky. Having a real non-fictional word in a game that presents all its dialogue in a fictitious made-up language completely goes against the design, so I don't think it belongs to Self on that basis alone. Secondly, this line of dialogue is not just found in the unused audio file. It can be located in other sound files linking to other parts of the game. This lessens the likelihood of it being Selph, as the audio would have linked to just his file alone rather than multiple strings of audio data. I speculate that this audio line is one of two things. It's either a placeholder that was recorded by Sonic Team to drop into various sections of the game so they could test out different audio effects before they implemented the final Dream language recordings, or the dialogue is leftovers from a sound effects library that they used during development. Personally, I would love to believe this is Selph talking to us, but the evidence strongly points towards it being nothing of the sort. That kinda put a downer on things. Let's pick up the mood by talking about that other thing I mentioned. For this next section, I'm going to have to get a little technical, which is a problem because I'm not a tech person in the slightest, so if I get any details wrong, then I apologise. The reason I need to talk about this though is it's going to put into context just some of the issues that had been facing the community for years. This one is in regards to binary files. Video games contain binary, a system of zeros and ones that sequence together to take information from the data and present it to us in a recognizable way, such as how a 3D model should look when it's rendered in a game world, for example. There exists binary viewing tools that allow you to point to a specific part of the game's data and visually display what that part is supposed to look like. Now, when it comes to Sega Saturn games in particular, they were programmed and coded in a way that isn't recognizable to these tools. So when we throw Knights' data into a binary viewing tool, the software attempts to read that data but doesn't quite understand it, which results in it incorrectly displaying the data like this. That's quite a mess. You might get some recognizable visuals from it, like in this case the word sound test is just visibly clear, but more often than not, huge portions of the data would simply display as cluttered static. With some workarounds, you could find ways to get images to display a bit more correctly, but you had to have the knowledge to do that. These sorts of issues are what hindered the community from making any major progress. The image you're looking at right now was provided to me by Ketrin, a member of the 2021 Datamine project. While this screenshot was taken during the 2021 data mining period, it is representative of what some of the data mining looked like in earlier attempts, and it was during one of those earlier isolated solo data mining attempts where I saw something similar to this screenshot. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble remembering who that person was, and I can't seem to locate the original post either, which is not very professional, I know, but it will tie together regardless, as you'll eventually see. I believe it was around the period of the 2010s when someone posted a warped static image similar to the one you're looking at now, and in there, they found this. It was the discovery of an unused Selph name tag graphic, spelt grammatically correct with an F at the end instead of the PH. This was essentially the very first graphical asset to be discovered in connection to the character, and by finding it, this asset completely confirmed two specific things about him. Firstly, the character was definitely more than just a concept. This name tag graphic belongs to an in-game menu screen listing the bosses of the game. Since Sonic Team had developed Selph's name tag assets for the on-screen menu, then it meant Selph's development went beyond concept. The character had a graphical asset that was developed and added to the game's data, despite it going unused. This means Selph wasn't just something they considered adding, it was something that was in the process of being added but then cancelled. Secondly, this discovery confirmed the character's official canonical name. The SFD file spelt Selph with an F, and this graphical asset now supported that version. If Sonic Team went as far as developing visual assets of this variation, then it strongly implies that this was the intended version of Selph's name. Since our initial discovery of Selph came from the concept boss list, the PH version is the one most of us grew accustomed to, but if we're talking about accuracy, it isn't the correct version. The PH version did come from a concept list after all, where things like Mrs. Fatty once stood in place for Puffy, for example. It's a name that was thrown around during development, but was likely never intended to be the final version of the name. That being said, I do understand the preference towards the concept name variation. The PH does make it look more dynamic and interesting, at least it does to me. Furthermore, the PH version helps to differentiate the name from the common word Selph, which is something that Knights also has regarding the lowercase I. Knights is spelt with a lowercase I to help differentiate the name from the regular word Knights. I personally prefer the concept version, but I agree that it was not Sonic Team's intended vision for him, and I accept that the grammatically correct version is the canonical one. Whichever version you decide to use is entirely up to you, as both of them still reference the same character.
How do walkers never gain the weight back? Hormones! Women with high cortisol levels.
Another asset was successfully data mined during the early 2010s period, though just like the previously mentioned name tag, the person responsible for discovering this next asset has also been lost to time. I've searched through numerous posts and I can't seem to find who it was. I want to say it's Mersuki because there was a brief moment where they were doing a solo data mine of their own, so it could very well be their discovery, but if it was theirs, I can't find the source linking them to this. So if I've got this information incorrect, then my apologies again. Due to all the random solo data mining attempts that would occur at various times throughout the years, with nobody really keeping track of who found what and when they found it, it can get very tricky pinpointing some of the origins for these discoveries. Anyway, let's continue. Each boss in Nights in the Dreams has a stylized emblem. These emblems can be seen on the boss menu screen alongside their name tag. They can also be seen after completing a level, where it shows scores on a leaderboard accompanied by an emblem to represent which boss was encountered during that run. These emblems are designed to be abstract, but still contain enough detail to tell us which boss they're representing. For example, Gulpo's emblem displays a fish, Claus's emblem displays a cat, Wise Man's emblem displays one of his hands, and so on. If Selph has an in-game name tag graphic, then was it far-fetched to presume he might have had a stylized emblem to accompany it? As it turns out, it wasn't so far-fetched at all. In the data, there exists one single boss emblem that goes unused, and with Selph being the only boss that was cut from the game, it's incredibly likely this unused emblem belongs to him. The discovery of this emblem marks the first time a visual for the character has been seen. The only problem is, it's abstract, and because we don't know what Selph actually looks like, we are left guessing at what is even being depicted here. The most common analysis that people seem to agree on is that it's showing us a head that is turned to our left. This side profile depicts one of Selph's eyes as the main focal point, while a long singular spike sticks out from the back of his head. The bottom part of the emblem can either be seen as a smaller spike, giving the character a Metal Sonic type of head shape, or it is the character's neck that is sticking outwardly. I'm not sure which of those two descriptions I personally lean towards, but it honestly could be either of the two, and until we get a proper visual of Selph, this emblem will be entirely up to personal opinion. And if we're on the subject of personal opinion, here's one of my own. It's gonna get a little crazy for a bit, and even though it's nothing more than my own strange speculation, I just want to document it regardless. For quite a few years now, the character depicted in this emblem has reminded me of another Sonic Team character, the Sonic Adventure boss known as Chaos, specifically Chaos Zero. If this emblem is depicting Selph from the side, then I think it has some design similarities to Chaos. Firstly, the shape of the head is similar, and although the protrusions from the back of their heads are of different lengths, they do angle outwardly from the same regions, one going from the top and the other going from the bottom. Secondly, the placement and shape of the eyes are similar to Chaos's, appearing huge and alien-like. It's also worth noting how Selph's emblem seems to make his eyes a focal point, and on Chaos's design his eyes are also pretty central to his appearance. And even though this emblem is designed to be abstract, the lack of any strong facial details reminds me of Chaos's design, which is also lacking major features. I often wonder about how Selph might have appeared and functioned as a boss. The name implies that he will likely to be some reflection of yourself. The boss theme called Know Thyself feels like you would battle yourself to better know yourself. In what way can you visually present a character that is designed to represent yourself? The answer might come as a blank slate of sorts, a creature that is bland by default but can morph and change into whatever person he's reflecting, and while those specific conditions don't apply to Chaos directly, Chaos is also known for being a blank slate design that can morph depending on the circumstances. Of course, we have no idea if Selph was going to have morphing abilities, but it's a concept that doesn't seem so ludicrous considering what the character might have represented. If that were to have been the case, even though Selph's reasons for morphing might be thematically different from Chaos's, it's still an ability that could have originated with Selph's concept but then restructured to fit Chaos's. Another peculiar thing is how Chaos is linked to the creatures known as Chao, Sonic Adventure's system that sees you raising pets which will either love or hate you depending on how you treat them. This system is lifted directly from Knights' A-Life feature, seeing you interact with creatures that either grow to like or dislike you. Could it be that one of the reasons Chaos was written to be linked to a system that was brought over from Knights is because the character's design also originated from Knights? I am absolutely making a reach here, and this is entirely my own speculation. I am pulling this from nowhere but a deep dive inside of my own head. Maybe I'm just seeing what I want to see and I'm retroactively applying Chaos's appearance onto Selph, but whenever I look at Selph's boss emblem, I just see aspects that remind me of Chaos, and I can't help but wonder if Selph's removal from Nights into Dreams might have prompted Sonic Team to repurpose the character for Sonic Adventure instead. I'm not even sure if I would believe this myself, to be honest, but it is a weird idea that I wanted to document regardless. Until we get an actual detailed visual of Selph, crazy theories like this will remain as nothing but crazy theories. To this date, this boss emblem is the only official canonical image that has been discovered depicting Selph's appearance. There's a bit of a running joke within the Knights community that one of the ways the character remains active during their IP's dormancy is by making cameo appearances in other Sega games. The character stays relevant by abusing the cameo system, and so you're never quite sure where Knights is going to pop up next. As I said, nothing more than a silly joke at the expense of Knights being a cameo character for so many years. What's really funny though is how one of the biggest Knights data mining projects to date began simply because someone started recognizing the character from those cameos. In 2019, Grandma Warden had been playing Sonic Adventure 2 for the first time and was noticing this purple jester dotted around the place. Later acquiring Sonic Adventure 1, she found herself spending time on Knights' pinball table, and the character piqued her interest just enough for her to purchase the 2012 PC remaster. After playing Nights into Dreams and taking a liking to it, she decided to try data mining it, but there was one big difference between this attempt and the data mines that came before. Grandma Warden was proficient in programming. A language that is completely alien to people like me was something that was natural to her, and she jumped right in. The 2021 Nights into Dreams data mine project began here, all because of some character cameos in the Sonic Adventure series. Beginning with the 2012 PC remaster, Grandma Warden started covering some ground from that version of the game alone. Around this point, Ketrin jumped on board to assist, and the two of them tore through layers of the remaster. I've documented a huge portion of their discoveries already in my previous videos, so if you want to see what they dug up, then please check those out. News about the project began to spread, and a few more people with other levels of knowledge joined in, which allowed Grandma to create a tool that could view and rip textures from the Saturn version. Cluttered, static images in black and grey were now fully coloured images, displaying as intended. What had been 20 years of small little data mining attempts here and there suddenly erupted into an avalanche of progress overnight. With the assistance, with the manpower, and with the genuine eagerness to dig into something that had never been excavated properly before, the 2021 Knights Datamine project became a gold rush, and Selph was on the hit list. Right out of the gates, a number of developments occurred regarding the elusive boss. Firstly, thanks to a random post by Gigglyman, Ketrin suddenly observed something that was about to debunk one of the longest running mysteries so far: Selph's mirror staff. Yeah, you remember me talking about that at the start of the video? That, of all things, actually has closure. As it turns out, this asset that had been data mined in the early 2000s was nothing more than one of Wiseman's fingers which had displayed incorrectly when it was ripped. It was simply a distortion of something that was already in the game. No mirror staff, no weapon belonging to Selph, it was just a misinterpreted sprite of Wiseman's bloody finger. You gotta love it. Secondly, thanks to Grammar's image viewing tool, Ketrin was able to rediscover Selph's boss name tag, and we could finally view this asset properly. The graphic contains the same colouring scheme as the other boss name tags that appear in the game, showcasing a white hue that gradually transitions into light green towards the lower half. Seeing the name tag alongside Selph's boss emblem concluded another small part of the search, as these two assets that complemented each other were now successfully ripped and accounted for together. It was around this point when someone contacted Ketrin with a very intriguing suggestion. They claimed that assets belonging to Selph might be sitting in the ending credits data for the game. It's presumed that this unknown user had attempted to data mine those files themselves but hadn't fully succeeded due to limitations, but with Grammar's data mine project, it could technically be possible now. In the game's data, a file labelled name.prs contains credit screen name tags for every character in the game. These name tags are also accompanied by a piece of rendered art of the character, for which the art data resides in a highly compressed state in a file called ending.bin. Our unknown informer hypothesized that, like the boss name tags with their accompanying emblem, perhaps Selph had a name tag for the credit screen that could be accompanied by a rendered piece of art. This was a shot in the dark, but it actually made some logical sense. Every character in the game has rendered art during the ending credits. Since it seemed Selph went beyond the concept stage but was cancelled mid-production, it was entirely possible that the devs could have gotten as far as creating a rendered image of him for the credit screen. If so, was that image still in there but just going unused? We needed to take a look, but that wasn't going to be easy. As I mentioned, the file containing the rendered art for the ending credit screen was in a highly compressed state. Getting through those layers of compression was a huge problem that needed solving. In the meantime, on November 30th, 2021, Ketrin dived into the name.prs file and along with Grammar Warden, together they pulled out all the name tags that were in there. Yo. Man said, yo, what on earth is going on? That random tip from the anonymous user had led us to a brand new discovery directly connected to Selph. The character has an unused name tag that would have appeared on the ending credits screen. Furthermore, similar to the other text asset, this discovery solidifies Sonic Team's intended version of Selph's name, once again spelling it as it's grammatically meant to be spelt. With this discovery, we now sat on one of the biggest leads in the history of the search. It was a solid theory. If a name tag exists for the ending credits screen, then surely there had to be art to accompany that tag. The team needed to get through the compression and search the data for artwork. On December 4th, 2021, Ketrin put out a call to see if anybody could assist the team with this daunting task. The project was approached by three key individuals: Knight of Dragon, Andreas Scholl, and Amy Wright. Knight of Dragon was able to locate whereabouts in the memory the decompression code was, as well as figure out which memory addresses the decompression function was reading and writing to. Andreas Scholl located a table that contained all the addresses that the function read from, and using this knowledge, Amy Wright began building a tool that would attempt to decompress the rendered art from the ending credits screen. It was a time-consuming task, as Amy slowly broke through the layers of compression. On December 30th, 2021, Amy had done all she could, and came back with the final word on this part of the data mine. Selph was not there. There was no artwork of him. In fact, all the art they found appears in the ending credits. There were no unused pieces of rendered art located anywhere in the file. It's probable that the artwork used during the ending credits screen was added towards the end of production when they wrapped it up and compressed the assets. I have no doubt in my mind that rendered artwork of Selph exists somewhere, because if he's got a name tag for the credit screen, then artwork definitely had to have been created to accompany it. It just seems that in this particular instance, Sonic Team were thinking ahead and didn't lock down any ending artwork until it was time to do so. I'll be honest, this bit of bad news was a little heavy. This was one of the strongest leads we had. It ended as quickly as it had begun. And sadly, it didn't lead us to finally finding Selph. But it certainly gave us one of the biggest roller coaster rides during this entire search, and the progress that was made by those 3 individuals just goes to show what can be achieved when people work together to overcome an obstacle. I was able to speak to Amy briefly about the tool she created, and I'd like to quickly make a side note about why tools like this are important to the community. At the moment, the tool is functional but not entirely complete. It rips art in black and white because the color palette data for the artwork hasn't been found yet. Once the color palette data is found, the tool can be updated to rip the art as intended. Upon doing so, we could put these pieces of art through an AI that will upscale them into higher definitions. And why is that important? Well, the artwork seen in the ending credits has never been publicly released by Sega, and it's unknown if Sega even kept these assets themselves. The mid-90s were a weird time in game development where developers wouldn't always keep their resources once a game was released. They'd even sometimes just casually trash their source codes outright. Entire games have been stuck in the past simply because preservation wasn't considered back then. It's one of the reasons data mining these games and preserving their assets is so important today. We are getting further and further away from those games, and preservation is absolutely crucial before their content is lost entirely. If this tool in particular ever becomes fully complete, we will have successfully preserved an entire gallery's worth of official Knights artwork. Big video game companies are busy, and allocating budgets to projects like this are rare. It's understandable why they might never do this work themselves. So it's our job to reverse engineer those old games and preserve their content. That's why I will always strongly encourage anybody and everybody to take part in whatever way they can to help preserve the legacy of these old games. This Knights data mine happened because the right people started talking to each other. Together they are figuring out ways to reverse engineer different sections at a time. Whether we ever find Selph one day or not, the fact remains that we are capable of achieving so many amazing things if we just work together in the first place. I know I got a little preachy just there, but video game preservation is a really important subject that needs more attention, and the more people we have taking part in this subject, the better our chances are of successfully preserving our video game heritage.
You've probably seen this girl all over your social media feed. She says that you don't have to cut carbs to lose weight. You don't have to run on the treadmill. And it sounds too good to be true, right?
If you think that I don't eat carbs, you're wrong. If you think that
On the 6th of December 2021, around the time of his arrival on the project, Andreas Scholl discovered these unused objects. They were 2 different sets of 3D modelled emblem heads. One seems to depict either Riala or Knights, while the other set is of an unknown character. They were located in the common objects file data, meaning these items were something that could appear in every level, possibly as a collectible item, though that's not been confirmed. These 3D head models were not found in the data for the final game. Instead, they were found hiding in the data for the E3 beta demo from 1996. As I said, these items are unused and are not present at all in any gameplay element, implying that by the time the demo discs were being created for E3 that year, whatever these 3D emblems were supposed to have been had been cut from the game. This means that they are remnants from a much earlier build that were accidentally carried over into the demo's data. I ended the previous Knights data mine video on a cliffhanger regarding these strange objects, partly for atmospheric effect, but mostly because I wanted to give the team enough time to further investigate this discovery. While we didn't want to jump to conclusions, it was hard to ignore the fact that one of the heads didn't resemble any other character in the game, and with Selph being the odd one out, we began entertaining the possibility that this could belong to him. The problem here is this. Due to this item being nothing but a remnant from a much earlier build, trying to learn anything further from data mining the demo is bringing us to dead ends. These items were simply not part of the game design anymore. Furthermore, the fact that the demo only seems to contain 40% of what the final game contains likely means that any chance of finding further unused content surrounding these objects is ridiculously slim. This sadly puts us in a position that we've been in before regarding Selph: speculation. We can only theorize as to what these objects might have been, and there's currently no solid confirmation for any of it. What I aim to do now is provide points for and against linking these objects to Selph. Some lines of speculation leads us to believe it could be, while others consider the possibility that this might have nothing to do with Selph at all. I want to document both sides of this discussion, as well as provide my own theories, before concluding this video with what some of our options are going forward. Let's start with the observations that are against these items being connected to Selph. Firstly, if these 3D head emblems are meant to depict Selph, then the shape and design of this model doesn't seem to resemble the image displayed in the boss emblem. The abstract art shows a smooth round forehead with some protruding spikes. The 3D model emblem looks like it's displaying something similar to that of a hooded appearance, with a diamond shape on the forehead area. Furthermore, the 3D model shows curling horns that hang down on both sides. The boss emblem image doesn't seem to display anything of the sort. There is a complete disconnect between these two designs. This argument can be countered by saying that perhaps these are both Selph, but maybe one or the other was simply an outdated version of how he looked. The character did get cut during development, so it's possible they could have still been altering his appearance as they went along, but that's just a wild stab in the dark and it's not built from any solid evidence. The second observation comes from analysing the other set of heads, which might give us a crucial detail to consider. Now, this set could very well belong to Riala due to the shape of the horns. Riala's horns are much wider and angular than Knight's, so it's easy to presume these belong to Riala. But there's a few strange discrepancies that might imply otherwise. Riala's hat shape contains 2 points on the forehead, whereas Knight's hat shape only contains 1 point on the forehead. The forehead markings on this emblem shows only 1 point for the rim of the hat. It's one of the only details that is graphically displayed on this emblem, implying it has visual significance. It's possible this set doesn't belong to Riala at all, but instead it might be referencing Knights. There's actually some potential evidence that might back this up. The old Japanese website contains a weird unidentified emblem that doesn't appear anywhere in the game. For years, fans have wondered who this emblem was referencing, as the colour scheme doesn't match any character from Nights into Dreams. However, one of these data mined emblem heads does closely match the one on the website. They both contain a shiny shade of gold with blue stripes running along the horns. It's not identical, but it is ridiculously close considering what they're both depicting. On the website, the emblem is displayed with a string of text reading "More Knights," which links to other pages that contain information about the game. From a graphic design perspective though, it would be a bit strange to have a piece of text utilising Knights' name, but displaying an emblem referencing Riala or another character. Knights is the titular character after all. It would be like having a sign that reads "More Sonic" and then showing Shadow or Knuckles instead, for example. It just doesn't make sense from a graphic design point. So I'm personally being led to believe that this shiny golden emblem is depicting some weird alternative version of Knights. And if this 3D model is meant to be referencing that emblem, then it leads me to speculate about the other set of heads. Maybe this second set also belongs to Knights. Perhaps what we're seeing here are two variations of the same character. But if that's the case, to what end and what purpose? Well, Knights is an anti-hero, a character created from Nightmare who rebelled simply because they wanted to do their own thing and be free. The character you play as is right on the fine line between good and evil. This is referenced in the game by how you treat the Nightopian creatures. You can help raise them by hatching eggs, or you can reduce their numbers by paralooping them. Doing good actions causes the Nightopians to become happy by your presence, while attacking them causes them to run away scared when they see you. Depending on their mood, the music in the level will change to reflect their attitude towards you. This system is known as A-Life. It essentially acts as somewhat of a morality gauge. Nights into Dreams uses the Nightopians to track your moral alignment, whether you're behaving more heroically or demonically. So my speculation then regarding these emblems is, what if both sets depict Knights but with different moral alignments? What if Knights was to have had some actual visual differences depending on how you played the character? The more evil you are, then the longer and angular your horns become, eventually portraying Knights on the same hat shape level as Riala. But the more good you are, the horns become shorter and softer, until they eventually resemble this unidentified hat shape. Knights is also known to shapeshift depending on certain circumstances, so having the character morph depending on how good or evil they are doesn't seem such a far-fetched idea. But that being said, in the entire history of the game's development, I've never heard of such a feature for Knights being mentioned, aside from the Nightopians and A-Life system. But regardless, my theory that goes against these items being connected to Selph is that they're part of some scrapped morality gauge that would have affected Knights' appearance directly, and the character depicted in these two sets of emblems is Knights themselves. Now let's explore some theories that are in favour of these items being linked to Selph. Firstly, the fact remains that this head shape doesn't match any character seen within the game. Even though the boss icon appears to be depicting a completely different visual design, once again it could be possible that either one of these could be showing us an outdated design for Selph, since the character never made it to completion. Secondly, this set of emblems have colour combinations that don't match any other character either. At least the blue and golden emblem shares similarities with the previously mentioned graphic on the old website. For this unidentified head, none of its colour schemes seem to link to anything. Thirdly, we must remind ourselves just where in the data these items were located. They were data mined from the common objects file, meaning they're items that would have had the ability to appear in any level that required them. It's theorized that these emblems could be some form of collectible item. This theory stems from the observation that different colour variations exist, implying that they might be part of sets that need to be completed. There's 4 colour variations per set, and there are 4 courses per level. There are also technically 4 levels per character, so as a collectible they could have functioned as 1 per course or 1 per level. It would have worked either way. Furthermore, it's worth noting how these 3D models look once they've been loaded into a level. It's not so straightforward getting them to load, and we need to perform a workaround to do it. If we model swap with another common level objects item, in this example we'll use the egg clock, we can swap out the clock for one of the emblems. Now please ignore some of the assets that still belong to the egg clock, like the rotating clock face hands and the beam of light, and just focus on the emblem itself. Looking at these items in game, they contain a shiny metallic surface. They've clearly been designed to stand out and draw your attention, further leading us to believe that they might have been collectibles. But if that's the case, then these emblems are presented in a way that differs from most of the other collectibles in the game. Star chips, blue chips, even the Idia themselves are all 2D sprites, yet these emblems are 3D modelled. The only other collectible items that I can think of that are 3D modelled are the power-ups, and those power-ups are hidden until you paraloop a specific part of a stage, and then they suddenly appear. This hidden aspect of the power-ups takes me back to what Yuji Naka said about Selph being a hidden boss. Could it have been that you would have had to search the levels for these hidden emblem heads, and by collecting the entire set, it would unlock the boss fight with Selph? If you really want to think about Sonic Team's game design, then what about special stages? Here's a random one. What if that mysterious blue door object that was seen in stock footage from earlier builds were linked to some form of scrapped special stage, where just like Sonic at the very end of his special stages, you are rewarded with a shiny rare collectible item, which upon completing a set of those rare items unlocks more game content, in this case being Selph's boss fight. That might sound a bit implausible, but it's not such a reach when you take into account how Sonic Team designed their games back then. And if not a special stage, then at the very least, these items could have been collected during the main levels to unlock Selph. There's one small potential piece of evidence that might back this up, and while it's still part of intense speculation, I've saved it towards the end of this part because I want to believe it holds some weight into tying up this theory. Let's turn our attention to the other set of emblem heads. It's all very well and good that I'm attempting to link these unidentified heads to Selph, but what about the other set? If these emblems would unlock a boss fight with Selph, then what about these ones? What would they unlock? Well, here's where it gets a little weird. Do you remember earlier when I told you about the nameplate for Selph being discovered, and how that nameplate would have appeared in a menu screen that lists all the boss battles in the game? Selph wasn't the only unused nameplate they found. There's another unused nameplate for Riala, which is titled Riala Returns. This nameplate is entirely separate from Riala's regular nameplate. For some reason, Riala would have had 2 nameplates, implying that there could have been 2 different encounters with him. If we're speculating that this set of emblems belongs to unlocking Selph, then perhaps this other set belonged to unlocking a second battle with Riala, for which this nameplate could have been in reference to. This theory is counter-argued by implying that Riala's unused second nameplate could have been for the 2-player mode, where player 2 controls Riala in a multiplayer version of his boss fight. That sounds like it could make sense, and I'm even partial to believing it, but from a graphic design perspective, having a nameplate that's located within a boss menu but references a 2-player element seems messy. It doesn't fit the criteria. Why would you have information from a multiplayer section of the game located within your boss menu? It doesn't make sense. though it could be further argued that the reason this nameplate goes unused in the first place is because Sonic Team came to that very same conclusion themselves. This could be an unused nameplate for the 2-player mode, and the reason it goes unused is because it doesn't fit with the boss menu, and there was probably nowhere else to put it, so they just scrapped it entirely. That is a logical and possible explanation, but then I'm willing to counter-argue all of that by asking, if it's for the 2-player mode, why is it titled Riala Returns? That's not very descriptive of what 2-player mode actually is. This unused boss nameplate has a complete focus on just Riala, and the implications of Riala returning sounds more like an event or scenario rather than a small fun multiplayer element. For my argument in favour of this discovery being linked to Selph, I speculate that these emblems are scrapped rare collectible items that would have unlocked 2 additional boss fights within the game. One of these emblem sets would unlock a second encounter with Riala, while the unidentified one would link to unlocking the boss fight with Selph. There's also another theory exploring the idea that instead of one, both of these emblem sets could belong to Selph. If we consider the possibility that Selph's appearance might be manifested as the reflections of a person's inner self, perhaps one emblem set is showing us Elliot's version of the character, and the other is showing us Claris's version. Maybe you collected one specific set as Elliot to unlock his boss battle with Selph, and for Claris you searched for the other set. That is also a possible theory to consider. Excluding the Nightopian A-Life system, Nights in the Dreams lacks a lot of post-game content, and it's possible to complete the main game in under an hour. The shortness of this game has always felt strange to me, but by having 2 additional optional boss fights, ones that might have been unlocked by the player exploring the levels in search of rare emblems, could have extended the game time tremendously. Of course, as I said at the start of this section, these are all just theories, and until there's another breakthrough to provide us with further answers, they'll have to remain as nothing more than that.
I got the fastest metabolism of my life in 30 seconds with this NASA-approved ice trick. NASA scientists finally cracked the code on how to lose weight and keep...
Once again, like the many attempts before, this data mine project is now starting to encounter dead ends in regards to our search for Selph. As it has been stated, remnants of Selph in the retail version's data is scarce. Maybe there might be another small discovery here or there in the future, but because the character was scrapped before the final build went to release, I personally think any chances of finding a visual for Selph in the retail version is unlikely. Data mining the E3 beta demo provided us with one of the most mysterious discoveries in the form of those emblems, but because these scrapped objects are remnants from a much earlier build of Knights, there's no way to find out more about them. The simple fact is, the disc is just a demo. It only contains 40% of the game's data. No matter how much it gets data mined, at the end of the day, it can only provide us with a limited amount of information because it's not a complete beta build. So, where does that leave us? If the search for Selph still continues, where are we supposed to look next? Well, I think it's time to consider our options. We do have a few of them, but each one comes with their own possibilities and hindrances. Firstly, we could just outright approach the developers and ask them about Selph again. After all, we've done it a few times before in the past, so it's not like the people involved are out of reach. But that being said, of all our possible options, this one might prove to be the most troublesome. By approaching the developers and presenting our discoveries, they could possibly take offense to that. Some developers don't like the idea of their products being data mined, and should the legal department suddenly get involved, they might shut the project down entirely. Now, Sega do seem to be somewhat lenient with people making fan games and retooling their assets, but is that a chance we're willing to take with Knights? I'm not sure I would personally want to search for 20 years only to have a legal department shut down everything that's been accomplished so far. That would be such an incredible waste. Furthermore, having someone just casually reveal Selph's appearance takes away the thrill of the search. Up until now, aside from a few small moments where the developers have provided information, all of this has been achieved by the fans. It was the community that got involved and started digging, and if we've been this committed for so many years, it feels like it's now our duty to try and find Selph on our own. We shouldn't rob ourselves of that moment. I feel approaching the developers and inquiring further about Selph should be seen as a last resort, and something that's only considered once we have exhausted all other options. The second option is to continue data mining the versions we have, but maybe expanding the numbers of the team further. This small team has accomplished so much, but it is still just a small team. It's possible there might have been things that we missed, or perhaps someone with a different area of expertise could break through other parts of the game's data. The more people that are involved, the more ground we can cover and even double check the areas that we have data mined already. The problem with this option is it requires people to know how to data mine, and even if they don't, they need to be able to learn the basics to get started. The team can teach you how to data mine, so the help is there if you need it, but you need to be personally committed to doing this yourselves. Another problem is that these are still just the same versions we've been data mining already, and although not every single nook and cranny has been dug up yet, the likelihood of finding Selph is small. I personally feel that more people should get involved because it can only help this project in the long run, but we have to acknowledge that this option is just covering the same ground and could likely yield no further results. The final option is quite a radical idea, but it's one that I've been thinking about a lot, and for as difficult as it might be to achieve this, I think it might provide us with one of the best shots we have at finding Selph. I think we need to try and find an earlier build of Nights into Dreams. If we really want to learn more about what was cut from the game, then we need to data mine a full beta build that predates the E3 demo. These emblems, the assets connecting to the blue door, the beta IDEA capture, Selph, all these things could be sitting in an earlier build. Some of them might even be in a functional playable state. I know this is a complete long shot, but it's not entirely impossible. I mean, stranger things have happened. Travis acquiring the E3 beta demo in 2007 only for Andreas to successfully data mine these emblems from it 14 years later is proof of that. The fact that the community came into possession of an E3 demo in the first place is crazy enough. It happened once. I'm sure with enough luck it could happen again. So what odds are facing us with this radical suggestion? What do we need to do? Well, firstly, video game prototypes and beta builds are not easy to come by. In fact, they can be very difficult, especially if you're looking for something specific. These discs are created by the developers, mostly for internal use within the company. More often than not, these discs were never meant to end up in the hands of the public. In some cases, a proto build might be sent from the company to video game publications so that journalists can preview their games before release. For these discs to go public means they were either hoarded by someone who used to work at the company or a journalist held onto the builds they were given. The discs then either get donated or dumped online for everyone to use, or they end up going for auction, which, as we've seen, can get quite expensive. But there is a community and culture surrounding this type of scene. Places like the Hidden Palace make it their goal to find and preserve these early builds of video games. The Nights E3 beta demo disc went public due to their involvement. So if we want to start looking for an earlier build of Nights, there are communities we can inquire with. But that being said, herein lies one of the most obvious hurdles about this option. If an earlier build of Nights was floating around within those communities already, then they likely would have dumped it online by now. The fact that an earlier build hasn't been dumped yet can mean either one of three possible things. 1. It means someone somewhere has an earlier build but is hoarding it. 2. Someone has it in their ownership but they are unaware of what it is. Or 3. There are no beta builds of Nights in public circulation. If it's the first scenario, then we would need to find the person hoarding it and discuss what would need to be in order for them to release it. The second scenario would require collectors to check their collections to see if they have it. Sometimes collectors may purchase boxes of discs at a time, not always knowing everything that's contained within those collections. It's entirely possible that a purchase of this sort could have been made and someone is holding on to a Nights beta build but is unaware that they have it, so we would need to ask collectors to check their collections to see if anything turns up. The last scenario is the possibility that there might not even be an earlier build of Nights in public circulation. From my own research, it does seem that the game was developed very close to Sonic Team's chest. I'm not sure if Sega would have given out beta builds for this game. A Japanese video game show called Game Catalog 2 reported that on March 27, 1996, Sonic Team announced Nights for the very first time at a conference. Sonic Team had been working on Nights as far back as summertime 1995, but they didn't announce it until spring 96. This date of March 27th is the earliest known moment when Nights became public knowledge. Between March and May, the game would get varying degrees of media coverage before making its playable appearance at E3 on May 16, 1996. Less than 2 months after that, on July 5th, the game was released in Japan. That time frame between March and July 1996 is a very small window for a beta disc to end up going public due to a journalist having a copy. It is possible, but as I said, it seems Sonic Team developed this game in secrecy for the most part, and any magazine articles I checked seemed to imply that the journalists went to Sega's building to demo the game rather than Sega sending out preview copies. Well, naturally I haven't checked every single magazine that covered Nights during those months, and I can't read Japanese either, so it's possible a Japanese publication might have been sent a beta build to preview, but I can't confirm any of that. From my own observations, I'm personally not banking on a journalist having a beta build somewhere in their collection. And even if they did, I do wonder about the date of those types of builds. Between March and the E3 demo in May 1996, how much would a supposed journalist copy differ from what we've seen already? We need to locate an earlier build of Nights that still contains these assets in a more complete state than what we found them in, because when we found them in the E3 beta demo from May 1996, they were merely remnants and no longer functional. I'm not sure if any journalist ever played a version of Nights that wasn't already close to how the game functions already. If we're going to look for an earlier build of Nights, I personally propose we look for a build that predates the public announcement on March 27, 1996. And if we're looking for a build that predates any public knowledge of the game, then the only way we're going to find that type of build is if someone from Sega hoarded it themselves. Either way, whether we search for a possible journalist copy or an internal development build that was hoarded from within Sega, to find a full beta build of the game that still contains assets shown in this development stock footage is a ridiculously tall order. But it's not impossible. And from what some communities have been able to achieve, with a lot of perseverance and some bloody good luck, you might just find your holy grail. Prototype builds of Sonic the Hedgehog 1 where Spring Yard was still being called Sparkling Zone and Sonic had his little victory animation at the end of a level. Beta builds of Sonic 3 that still contained the original songs for Carnival Night, Ice Cap and Launch Base before Michael Jackson's team became involved in the project. Locating scrapped characters like Hobocop from a cancelled version of Clay Fighter, to the absolutely infamous discovery of Luigi in a beta of Mario 64 and the entire L is Real story. It doesn't matter how crazy or impossible it sounds. If discoveries like those are able to happen, then it can happen for us too. We just need to remain committed to what we're looking for. We have been searching for Selph for 20 years, and even though we've started to run into dead ends again, I don't believe the journey should end here. We need to broaden our search and think outside the box. We need to approach data preservation communities and ask around if anybody has seen an earlier build. We need to ask collectors to check their collections and see if they just happen to have a random Nights build in there that they didn't know they owned. We need to find a full beta build of Nights into Dreams, one that predates the E3 demo and preferably the date of the game's announcement itself. If this data mine project has proven anything so far, it's that amazing things happen when we work together towards a common goal. Some discoveries during this data mine provided further context to previous mysteries. Other findings even went as far as debunking myths that had been around for decades. We would not have found some of these assets had certain individuals not become involved, and the only reason they became involved was because word of mouth travelled through the right connections. We need to talk, and keep talking, until someone somewhere down the line makes headway on the next lead that brings us one step closer. And through these communities and the efforts of every single person playing their part, I truly believe that one day we will eventually find Selph. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. I know it was longer than my usual content, but I wanted to cover as much as I could on this subject. And honestly, I've been meaning to make a video about this for a long time anyway. And with everything that was going on with the Nights data mine project, it felt like now was the right time to do it. And even though we were unsuccessful finding Selph, you only need to look at the progress that was made towards the search. And how many amazing discoveries were found elsewhere in general. Across the board, all these other amazing discoveries were found from this data mine alone. It really has been a gold rush, and it was awesome seeing it unfold. I want this video to help push the discussion surrounding Selph forward, in the hopes that it'll extend the reach of what we're capable of achieving with this search. Whether we ever get tremendously lucky by finding an earlier build of Nights, or by whatever other methods we decide to pursue. I believe if we keep going with this, we will eventually find him. I think we've come too far, and we've made and making so many amazing discoveries. It's been an absolute treat watching you all go to work on this thing. And once again, I'd like to remind everybody that the project's founder, Grammar Warden, has a page with detailed information regarding the search for self, so please go and check that out also. The links are in the description. I've been DJ Valentine, thanks for your time, take care, and thanks for watching. Previous mysteries, other findings even went as far as debunking myths that have been around for decades. We would not have found some of these assets had certain individuals not become involved, and the only reason they became involved was because word of mouth travelled through the right connections. We need to talk, and keep talking, until someone somewhere down the line makes headway on the next lead that brings us one step closer. And through these communities and the efforts of every single person playing their part, I truly believe that one day we will eventually find self. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. I know it was longer than my usual content, but I wanted to cover as much as I could on this subject. And honestly, I've been meaning to make a video about this for a long time anyway. And with everything that was going on with the Knight's data mine project, it felt like now was the right time to do it. And even though we were unsuccessful finding self, like you only need to look at the progress that was made towards the search and how many amazing discoveries were found elsewhere in general. Like across the board, all these other amazing discoveries were found from this data mine alone. It really has been a gold rush, and it was awesome seeing it unfold. I want this video to help push the discussion surrounding self forward, in the hopes that it'll extend the reach of what we're capable of achieving with this search. Whether we ever get tremendously lucky by finding an earlier build of knights, or by whatever other methods we decide to pursue. I believe if we keep going with this, we will eventually find him. I think we've come too far, and we've made too much progress to stop here. Before I go, I want to thank everybody from the 2021 Knights Data Mine project for getting involved and making so many amazing discoveries. It's been an absolute treat watching you all go to work on this thing. And once again, I'd like to remind everybody that the project's founder, Grammar Warden, has a page with detailed information regarding the search for self, so please go and check that out also. The links are in the description. I've been DJ Valentine, thanks for your time, take care, and thanks for watching.
are still far away from reaching clear blue skies. Go ahead, keep shooting with that ray gun flight. Veterans who dream through struggles are now officers in battle. Here and there we see the Highlands in procession. This one, that one doesn't matter. Every single person gathers, march unto our saintly dance. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, passing through the gates on the mountain peaks. Escaping this will kill all the evil fiends. Surely this will end in a day no more. Among the crowds giving their applause, thousands of cherry blossoms twinkling in the light. Though I can't hear your voice, keep what I say in mind. This bouquet that surrounds is iron poison seed, looking down at us from that big guillotine. Darkness has just engulfed the universe we know. The lament that you sing can't reach ears anymore. We are still far away from reaching peaks of hope. Go ahead, keep shooting, use that flashing bolt. On the train tracks running along the line, let us move forward, don't look behind. Boys and girls becoming like samurai, just like those from our previous life. Thousands of cherry blossoms twinkling in the light. Though I can't hear your voice, keep what I say in mind. That bouquet that surrounds is iron poison sea, leaping down to us from that big guillotine. Thousands of cherry blossoms twinkling in the light. Once your song can be heard, we'll dance with all our might. This bouquet that surrounds is iron poison sea. Go ahead, keep shooting with that ray on me.
Ever on and on I continue, circling with nothing but my hate in a carousel of agony. So slowly I forget, and my heart starts vanishing, and suddenly I see that I can't break free. I'm
Slipping through the cracks of a dark eternity, with nothing but my pain and the paralyzing agony. To tell me who I am, who I was, uncertainty enveloping my mind till I can't break free.
Maybe it's a dream, maybe nothing else is real, but it wouldn't be the thing if I told you how I feel. So I'm tired of all the pain, of the misery inside, and I wish that I could live feeling nothing but the night.